The Christmas story is well known. Rome came up with the idea of a census. Everybody had to go to their hometown to register. Joseph was not originally from Nazareth, so he had to go to Bethlehem with Mary. And this was a one-way 70-mile trip. It was a long and exhausting journey. So Mary and Joseph packed just enough provisions before they hit the road. On their way to Bethlehem, they met other travelers, but they couldn't keep up with their pace. Mary got tired easily and needed more time than the average person to rest. When they finally made it to Bethlehem, they found that there were no accommodations in the little town. When I think about the Christmas narrative, especially in that specific detail that there was no room available, I often wonder if Joseph and Mary knocked on enough doors. I often wonder why Joseph and Mary had to spend the night with the animals. And I often wonder what was going through people's mind that they couldn't show hospitality to a very pregnant woman. Was everybody so tired that they could not pay attention to the needs of anybody else, including this young lady who was in an extreme situation? As I ponder on the story, I wonder if people considered their privacy of supreme importance, that nobody wanted to share a room out of humanity. I wonder if there was no one in town willing to sacrifice their bed or at least some personal space to benefit a vulnerable couple just for a few days. You know, when I think about all those questions, I have to be honest and say that it is hard to answer these questions without thinking in negative terms. When we look at the Bible, friends, we learn that hospitality is an important theme throughout the Holy Scriptures. Welcoming strangers or travelers is a recurrent theme in the biblical text. And here in the Christmas narrative, we see how Joseph, Mary, and the baby she carried in her womb were denied a hospitable reception. I believe Luke is trying to tell us something with his unique detail of no room available. I believe this account is describing the kind of world God came to inhabit. Luke is letting us see the unfriendliness of those days. You know, today, when we think of Jesus' birth, we think of the whole event in lofty terms. We think about the angels. We enjoy thinking about lovely baby Jesus. Yet, I gotta remind you that that's only part of the story. The story in its fullness tells of Jesus coming to a very troubled, wounded, and hostile world to save us from these very things. According to the biblical narrative, the way to experience salvation is by making room for the Lord of Lords in our hearts. The way to experience salvation is by making room for Jesus in our families, in our nation, and the world. When we don't have room for Jesus, we sink deeper in hostility that affects ourselves and others. Luke says that there was no room in the inn. But Matthew gets even more graphic than Luke on the subject of lack of hospitality. And Matthew uses King Herod as an illustration to show what happens when people refuse to welcome Jesus. Because Herod considered Jesus to be a threat to his power, he was unwilling to receive Jesus in his world. Therefore, he ordered the killing of infants. Because of greed, fears, insecurities, there was no room in Herod's mind and heart for Jesus. And we know from the story that this resulted in a very inhumane, violent, and cruel act. So tonight, friends, as we ponder on the Christmas narrative, we can see the effects of not having room for Emmanuel, the God who is with us, always pursuing us. Refusing to make room for Jesus leads to insensitivity that is harmful and life-crushing. Herod is a good illustration, but I gotta tell you, we have several other examples in the history of humanity of what happens when we don't welcome Jesus into our lives. History has proven what happens when human beings do not welcome Jesus. We destroy one another. We sink in fears, and our brokenness causes more brokenness. God the Son was willing to be born in an unfriendly environment to save us from hostility. Jesus came to the world to restore our humanity to right functioning, to God's original design. It is true that history has proven what happens when human beings do not welcome Jesus, but likewise, history has proven what happens when there are people willing to let Jesus enter their personal space. The shepherds, who were considered very low-class citizens, less than human beings, were the first ones who received the news of Jesus' birth. And even when people despised them, God held them in high regard. And that night, along with the breaking news, the shepherds were shown their true worth in God. And I believe that after this event, their lives were never the same. Ordinary fishermen followed or allowed Jesus to enter into their boats. And as a result, their lives were made extraordinary. When Jesus entered the life of an assassin named Paul, his life was completely changed, and Paul became a world changer. We have many other examples. I can cite the names John Wesley, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., and others who have freely opened up to Jesus. And I got to tell you this, not only their lives were changed, but God have changed and continue to change through their legacy the life of many others. All because they made room for the Lord of Lords. In a night like this, dear friends, where we remember the angelic tune of peace on earth and goodwill among people, we also remember that humans can experience peace and goodwill as we welcome the Savior of the world in every area of our lives, every single day of our existence. As we make room for Jesus, as we make room for Jesus' message and what He stands for, we will live the life God wants us all to live. We will experience healing, and our brokenness will turn into wholeness. There was no room for the Savior of the world that first night in Bethlehem. But there is hope today. Neil Maxwell writes these words: each of us is an innkeeper who decides if there is room for Jesus. Tonight, you and I are the innkeepers. The question is, do you have room? Dear people of God, Christmas has begun. Go now in wonder. Go to bring light to those in darkness, joy to those who can find no joy. Take with you the gifts of inspiration and wonder to a world steeped in realism. Go with the songs of angels in your ears and the love of God in your hearts. Go and spread the word. Christ the Savior is born for all.